What happened to those who had attended a botched wedding? This was one I worked at. After the ceremony, right at the start of the reception, photographer was taking jumping photos of the bride and bridesmaids, so they were all jumping in the air while wearing heels. Bride landed and dislocated her knee, then passed out and kept going in and out of consciousness. We called an ambulance who turned up and fixed her knee etc., but she wanted to continue with the wedding. She then had the first course of the meal and threw up down her dress, and had to sit with her mum in another room while everyone else danced etc. Felt so bad for her as she spent the rest of the evening crying. There were no tables and chairs. Like none. They had an open bar but no freaking chairs. Everyone had to put their drink on the ground and hold their plate to eat. It was crazy. Everyone just assumed that some sort of terrible thing happened where the tables and chair people didn't bring them, but afterwards I asked her, the bride, what happened, and she just said, "Oh, we would have had to pay extra for that." I was a bridesmaid in my brother's wedding. Day of the wedding we are all getting ready as you normally would. I'm in the bridal suite area. Everything is going fantastically. The church is filled to capacity with guests. We all walk down the aisle and take our places, bridesmaids and groomsmen alike. My soon-to-be SIL is walking down the aisle on her father's arm. My brother is nowhere in sight. There is a long, awkward pause as my SIL is standing in front of a packed church, and we are all just looking at each other. Everyone is assuming the worst, that my brother has skipped out at the altar and left her. I'm whispering to the best man, "Where is he?" He says, "IDK. My mom is nearly having a heart attack." My dad finally gets up, goes to the room where my bro was supposed to be waiting, and comes out with my brother. My brother says, "Where's the minister? I was waiting on him." My bro hadn't left at all. The minister was a no-show. He was supposed to be waiting with my bro and walk out with him, or tell him when it was time to walk out, while groomsmen were lining up to escort bridesmaids down the aisle. Because no one had checked in on my bro after getting ready, no one knew the minister wasn't there. At this point, we are all standing in a group at the front of the church. The majority of the church guests still don't know what is going on, just that my bro had to be summoned, and there are angry looks all around. My dad realizes he needs to let them in on what's going on, so he announces to the guests, "We can't find the pastor. Is anyone here licensed?" Of course no one is. The bride's father calls the minister on his cell phone, on speaker, so the whole church can hear the conversation. "Hi Pastor Denny, where are you? Did you forget what today was?" "Yes Denny, the wedding. The wedding is right now. We are all waiting on you at the church." "Okay, we'll just wait here then." Turns out the pastor was playing golf and had put the wedding date down as the following weekend in his planner. I then ask my soon-to-be SIL if she wants us to walk back down the aisle and come back in or what. She says at this point, "Forget it, we are all here," so we just stand around and wait for Pastor Denny and try to make jokes with the wedding guests, but it's pretty awkward as no one really knows what to do. After about 15 minutes Pastor Denny comes running into the church in his golf clothes, polo shirt / funny shorts etc., apologizes and goes immediately into the vows. My poor SIL was furious that day, first thinking my bro had ditched her at the altar, then at the fact that the minister had ditched them. LOL. She laughs about it now, but it was a tense ceremony. My aunt had a wedding during a tropical storm. Power went out in the church during the ceremony, so it had to be completed in the dark with phone lights. Then at the reception, which was held in a semi-outdoor space, had generators to try to get some power up, but it was extremely loud so you couldn't hear the music or people. Then it rained so hard that water was seeping from the walls / ceilings, which flooded a good portion of the reception floor. Final piece, the maid of honor got so drunk she threw up right at the entrance of the venue, so everyone had to pass by it to enter / leave. Friend's wedding. A bunch of people got food poisoning at the rehearsal dinner, including the groom. He spent the night at the ER getting fluids and medication to stop puking. This was an awesome high-end wedding and he almost cancelled. He was a pale green color and basically sipped Gatorade all day and got through it. He married his HS sweetheart and they have been married 30+ years. My family was invited to what we thought was an engagement party. My aunt had reserved a room at a local restaurant for about 50 people. Turns out it was my cousin's wedding. So no one brought a gift or dressed up at all. Bride is in a wedding dress and groom is wearing jeans. We ordered food and drinks. The officiant does his thing while waiters are bringing in drinks and appetizers. Finally over and we get to eat. But when the officiant asked for the marriage license so they can all sign it, my cousin and his new wife just stared at him confused. They didn't know they had to get one. thought just having a wedding was enough. They were in their late 20s. So wedding, but no marriage. They never did officially get married, and he ran off a few years later to another state to be with some girl he met online. Went to the wedding of one of my husband's close friends and everything was going wonderful until about 3 hours in when the bride's grandma becomes unresponsive. We were sitting right next to that table when she falls to the floor not breathing. Our other friend, an EMT, ended up performing CPR on her until the paramedics came. He said he felt her ribs cracking under his hands. The wedding promptly ended as the bride and groom go to the hospital with grandma. She passed away in the hospital that night after an emergency surgery. I attended an outdoor wedding. In December. All the guests assumed there would be shelter/heating, but nope, nothing was provided. All us guests were freezing cold. Some got drunk as fast as they could and others kept asking the staff for cups of tea, not to drink but to hold the warm cups. It was awful. I used to work as a wedding planner, many years ago, and this was so common. Weddings in the summer with no shade or drinks, weddings in the winter with no heat. Long waits so kids start crying or grandma passes out. It's part of why I say people should only have the wedding they can actually afford, which usually means fewer guests. Friends of mine got married last winter in an absolutely stunning setting in the Canadian Rockies. Unfortunately, it was minus 30 degrees that day. Luckily only the ceremony was outside, but it was insane. Then the wedding party all went and took pictures outside. Some of the girls basically never stopped shivering the whole night. A coworker was to one of my closest friends' wedding, and there were strict food regulations, no nuts. Present were a few of individuals present who were really allergic, including the maid of honor. The venue served something with nuts, and the maid of honor became anaphylactic. The EpiPen did not work, and she died on the way to the hospital. Needless to say, there are several lawsuits. Well, I see a few others have told some awful tales, so I'll add mine. My first job at 15 was a banquet server. We had weddings most every weekend, so I've seen quite a few. The most memorable was a wedding between two firefighters that met on the job. Seemed like a normal wedding until just after the father-daughter dance. The bride's father collapsed. The staff went running into the ballroom because of the noise. Immediately, on-call EMTs that were in attendance were giving CPR and other life-saving measures. I distinctly remember a massive needle being put into the man. He was dead on the spot, but they waited until he was out of the venue to call the death, for obvious reasons. It was truly awful and the grandkids were hysterical. The bride was a total wreck. Everyone left shortly after. Even the staff were upset and had a hard time finishing work that day. It was truly terrible. I felt awful for the family and especially the bride. A few years ago, my cousin was getting married. The man she was marrying was perfect for her. I was jealous. I wanted something like they had. Anyway, the day of the wedding comes and her maid of honor, sister, and her soon-to-be husband are nowhere to be found. Well, she's waiting in the church and one of the groomsmen comes in with a handwritten letter, edit, from the fiancé. Turns out the maid of honor, her sister, and her fiancé have been sleeping together for a while, she's pregnant, and they've ran off to Vegas to get married. So, no wedding. I wasn't technically in attendance, and this is definitely not as botched as some of these other stories in the comments, but I used to have a friend who owned a small hotel which operated primarily as a wedding venue. They lived in one of the hotel rooms, so all of the events taking place in the courtyard directly outside their door could be heard very clearly. We were hanging out one night during a wedding and listening to the speeches, the most notable of which was the best man speech, during which he told the story of having a threesome with both the bride and groom at Burning Man, and heavily alluded to still being in love with the groom. Lots of older relatives in attendance. The place went silent and the wedding ended about 2 hours early. I was the photographer. The bride was very close to her stepfather, and her father had not been in the picture for a lot of her life, but he was invited to the wedding and they did 2 father-daughter dances, so he wasn't left out or anything. He was also supposed to pay for part of the photos, and he just showed up with no money. He eventually got mad, like she was doing something wrong by including the stepdad, who raised her and paid for most of the wedding, and for that matter, her upbringing. She spent like an hour crying in the back and eventually an uncle offered to pay for some of what the dad owed. I knocked off $100 and stayed an extra hour for free so we could get all the photos we would have done during that hour, but it was obviously not the same for her. Then the dad spent weeks harassing me to send him the photos I took because she wouldn't send them to him. I didn't, obviously. It was my very first friend to get married, a girl I'd known in high school. We were 24, 25. Classic rom-com nightmare scenario where the groom had second thoughts the day of and just bolted. We all just milled around for a while, not sure what to do. Awful vibes. The bride's mom was weeping hysterically. Me and some friends were finally making our way to the exits, and the bride stopped us, like, "Where the heck do you think you're going? You guys are taking me out to a bar right this minute, and you're gonna have to carry me out of there." So we did, mostly the young people, though a few stray aunts and uncles came along, including a few of the groom's relatives who were like, "He's a little punk anyway, you're better off without him." We all got unfathomably drunk, sang karaoke, glasses were shattered, the bride hit on literally every man there including me, though no one took her up on it. That would have been weird. There were a rough few months in store for her afterward, but that ended up being a hell of a party. I can still feel the hangover a decade later.